Okay. All right. And the chat is open. If anybody wants to get in on the chat is open for conversation. Now, let's just dive in. I'm not in the middle of a series. I hope that things go quickly today so that we don't have to turn this into a series. I'm gonna breeze through it. I will be reading a lot of scripture. Okay. I'm gonna read an entire chapter today. So be prepared. That'll be toward the end. But for now, I want us to turn to the book of Luke. Turn to the book of Luke, chapter number 14. Luke 14. We're going to read verses 25, 26, and 27. Luke 14, 25, 26, and 27. New Living Translation. And then later, we're going to go to the book of John, and we are going to read the whole chapter number 6. John chapter 6, the whole chapter. And if some of y'all have sat in conversation with me or have been around this ministry long enough, some of y'all know that John 6 is like one of my favorite chapters. And I say that, it seems like I say that all the time when I'm reading a certain verse because it's all good. But John 6, we're gonna read it and you'll see why it's so good. But beginning in Luke 14, verse 25, it says, a large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, okay, a large crowd was following him. Probably about 20,000 people. Okay. He turned around and said to them, and I want you to, as we read these verses today, just imagine, visualize it as if it were playing a movie in your brain. Allow your imagination to put you there, to feel what is happening in the crowd, to feel the emotion, to feel the energy, to hear the intention in Jesus's voice, the dialogue back and forth. Think about what people are thinking in the moment, what people are feeling and what they're experiencing. Take that approach today. Take that approach every time you read the Bible, but today, listen clearly to the words and allow yourself to imagine what's happening. So, a large crowd of about 20,000 people were following Jesus. That is the equivalent of a stadium full of people, men, women, and children. He turned around and said to them, if you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Okay? These are people that are following him, hanging on his every word, can't wait to hear more. And then he turns to them without warning and drops this bomb. He says, if you want to be my disciple, if you want to keep following me, if you want to go to the next level of dedication and faithfulness, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. And then he gives examples. He says, your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. Yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. Wow, that is heavy. So what we're going to do today, I'm titling today's Bible study, Church Member or Christ Disciple. Church member or Christ disciple. Which are you? Which one are you? We're gonna definitely take a look at that. So Today is going to be a very challenging discussion that should stretch you, should challenge you, should cause you to pause and think. There's this quote that I love. It says this: you can tell how passionate someone is, or how passionate someone is about a certain thing, by how they pursue that thing. You can tell how passionate someone is about a certain thing by how they pursue it. If someone is serious, you should easily be able to tell by their actions just how serious they are. Okay? In the workplace, the person who values the promotion, the person who wants to get the promotion, you can tell how serious he or she is by how well they perform. In fact, if there is a promotion to be had, the one who is super passionate will outperform everyone else. That's right. You can see how he works and you can say, oh, that one is serious. In sports, we've got any athletes in the building today. The one who trains the hardest and puts in the most work in the gym is usually the one who outperforms everyone else, and those are usually the ones who win. It is the winners who put in extra work, extra hours. You can tell who wants to win. You can tell who wants the trophy, who wants the championship, who wants the medal by how hard they work to get it. Just to use a basketball analogy, Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant is deceased, but there's common knowledge that no one could outwork Kobe. Kobe apparently would be the first one to arrive at basketball practice and would be the last one to leave. And apparently Kobe was a beast in practice. He would, talk, he would challenge people, taunt them, he'd push them, stretch them, get them to perform at a level that he was at. It was evident that he had an impeccable work ethic because of his level of gameplay. Even at 18 years old, they were touting him as the next Michael Jordan because Kobe had an impeccable work ethic. So you knew in sports who wants it most because they're the ones who work hard. Again, there's another criticism currently in basketball, in women's basketball. Apparently, the media has created a rivalry between Caitlin and Angel Reese, but I don't know Caitlin's last name. I forgot. And so, there's these viral videos going around about Caitlin, like shooting like 1,000 free throws or something crazy. And then, okay, so in the chat, Caitlin Clark, thank you. And then there's videos of Angel Reese not working out. In fact, she's hitting up parties and concerts and stuff. And so people are saying, well, ultimately, Caitlin's career will surpass Angel's career because she's putting in work. Now, we don't know what type of work Angel's putting in. We just know she's not publicizing it. So what I'm saying is this: people are looking at work ethic and they're determining, based on the amount of effort you're putting to something, the amount of energy you're putting to something, this will determine who wins. Here's one. In relationships, we measure how interested a person is in us by their pursuit of us. Now, I am married. I'm no longer in the dating phase, been married for a long time, but I still have to let my wife know that I'm interested in her. And so in relationships, when we see the pursuit of us, we now know that this person is interested in us. So for example, if he don't call you or if he don't text you, if she's not listening to you when you're talking to her, if he's always in his phone when y'all are together, this says, you know, I'm really not that interested. That's what it says. But to the one that's blowing up your phone, the one that's sending you text messages, or like me and my wife do, we send GIFs and memes and reels. We're sending them things to each other all day. To the one that is scheduling time, making time to meet with you, the one that listens to you and pays attention to you, that person, when they prioritize you, this says to you that I am definitely interested. See, there's a difference. And we know the difference by how much effort someone is putting in to pursue the trophy, the championship, the relationship, the promotion on the job. See, there's a big difference in somebody being hungry and somebody who just wants to nibble and have a snack. Big difference. So by now, you guys ought to know where I'm going with this. One of the issues that I have with people today is that within most people today, there is something missing. Within the mindset, within the heart of people today, there is something missing. And that thing is passion. People just aren't passionate about much anymore. You can ask somebody, hey, how you doing? I'm all right. Okay, well, what do you got up for this weekend? I don't know. Oh, okay. You're trying to get to know them. So, what do you do for fun? I don't know, just sit around the house. Okay, all right. People just aren't passionate about anything. What do you want to go eat? I don't know. I don't care. Okay. Well, we're gonna hang out this weekend. You got any places you want to go? I don't know. It don't matter. Okay. See, people aren't passionate. Why is that? Why is it that people aren't passionate to pursue something, maybe like they used to back in the day? I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what I think in the chat. Nonchalant energy. Absolutely. Why are people so nonchalant? I think it's this. I think people have too many options. I think that nowadays we have way too many options. And the more options that someone has, the less likely they are going to be passionate to pursue one thing. You don't get hungry when you've got plenty to eat, if that makes sense. And so what ends up happening is when you have all of these options available to you, you're not going to be passionate about one or the other. Because if this doesn't work, well, I'll just go to this one. I'll go to plan A. I'll go to plan B. And so these type of people never get hungry because they got plenty to eat. And here's the thing. This is why I believe this. Because once your options have been taken away from you, you suddenly experience this reality called scarcity. Scarcity. That's right. And when people experience scarcity, or what what scarcity means is the lack of something. When something is no longer readily available, in fact, it becomes extremely rare or hard to get. When people experience this, when commodities become scarce, people get hungry. What happens when you can no longer walk into your refrigerator and make any old type of meal you want? What happens when you walk to your refrigerator and nothing is in it? Suddenly, you're going to get real passionate and you're going to be in hot pursuit to satisfy that hunger. So, when people get passionate, when people get hungry, when people get hungry, they get passionate. And when people get passionate, people start pursuing, people start chasing, people start hunting and searching for things. Why? Because you've run out of options. You have no choice. It's either that or you go hungry and you die. Yes. Ask the person who is 40 years old and has never married. Yeah, person who's waited their whole life to build a career and chase the bag. And now they're lonely and they're ready to settle down. Yeah. Scarcity. You run out of options. Now you're desperate. Now you're passionate. Now you're ready to listen to him or her. Now you're ready to give these people a chance. When you could have settled down when you were younger, but you chose to put everything else in front. Scarcity. That's right. Or how about this? During a pandemic, when you just been eating out and living any old type of way, and now you can't go to the grocery store. Now you can't go anywhere. Now everything's shut down. Now you're stuck in the house. Or how about during a hurricane, right? You've heard you've had the opportunity, you've had the option to leave the city. You know the hurricane is coming. You chose to stay. And now you run out of options. Now you're desperate because you're trapped in your home, or maybe you're sitting on your roof waiting on somebody to come and save you now. See, people don't get hungry. People don't get desperate. People don't develop passion until they've run out of options. So, what ends up happening is, because we have everything we want, because we have everything in life that we could possibly need at our fingertips, we're not passionate about anything. If you want information, you can Google it. If you need a new shirt, you can do Amazon Prime delivery and it can be delivered to you by the end of the day. If you need friends or fake validation and love and affection, you can go on social media and post a thirst trap picture and everybody will heart it and like it and share it. You can get that empty validation there. If you want to travel the world, airline tickets are dirt cheap, thanks to Spirit and Frontier Airlines. And certainly if you want something to eat, you can literally run to the closest drive-through, which is probably 2 minutes from where everyone lives, and you can get food instantly. You see the options? You see how easy life is? You see how whatever you need, you can get? And what this does to a person is it gives us so many options. Guess what we don't need? We don't need God. We don't need God when we are living in this age where we can rely on receiving everything that we need for life from whatever source that is easiest to grasp, but God. We don't need God to provide anything for us. If you want some extra money, you can work 3 jobs. If you got an illness, well, you got your health insurance. You can take medicine. You got a doctor. You don't need God. If you lose your job and You know, your husband leaves you. Well, you can go right down to the friend of the court. Friend of the court will suck that man dry of child support, throw you some EBT card, pay your rent, and the government will be your daddy. Will be your husband, I mean, or daddy if that's what you, I don't know. So my point is this: people today don't need God for anything. They don't need God for anything. You can literally go online. You can go on the internet right now and find you a preacher and find you a church that will tell you that the sin that you are currently in, the sin that you are currently in that you know is wrong, the sin that you used to feel bad about, you can go online and find you a brand new preacher and he'll tell you that you are fine. Yeah. You can find anything online. You don't even have to pray and ask God for answers. Just Google it. Just keep scrolling until you find that preacher, until you find that church, and they will tell you exactly what you want to hear. Now, this is why people don't have passion. People don't get excited about anything. They don't have to. They don't have to invest their emotion into anything because they got options. It's too hard to invest emotion. They want it easy. I have been on this study of church decline. I've been on this topic of why churches aren't growing, why churches are shrinking, and why Christianity is struggling. And I shared this. Me and Brother Everett were texting about it earlier today. We were talking about it, and I shared a video with him. I'm actually going to play a little bit of that video for us today. So, this particular channel that I follow, I'm going to slow the speed down a little bit so that you guys can kind of hear what they're saying. So it's going to sound slurred, but the whole point is for me to try to trick the algorithm so they don't, strike me on YouTube. But I want you to hear this. And I actually preached on this a couple weeks ago. I taught on is the church failing? And I gave my 2 cents in that sermon, but then I came across this video and I found it pretty interesting. So let me share this with you guys. Okay, bear with me.
Every year are closing than are opening. Today, more churches in America every year are closing than are opening.
Today, we're talking to the pastor of a church that made the decision to close their church earlier this year.
This is a church that opened its doors for the first time more than 150 years ago.
We wanted to hear the story firsthand, but also talk about the broader implications that this rising trend could have on the future of the Christian faith in America.
All right, so these guys are speaking. This is a podcast, and they're speaking with a guy who closed his church, and his story is pretty incredible. But his story is certainly not unusual because churches are closing all the time. All the time they are, and so this was a pretty robust discussion, and I want you guys to kind of take in some of this stuff.
We're not alone in what we're seeing, because we know that pastors and congregations all over the country are seeing this same thing, and it's the number of folks who are not identifying with any religious tradition, or we call them the nones, is rising as congregation sizes are shrinking.
So what he said is that non-religious people, the number of non-religious people are increasing exponentially. And as a result, churches are shrinking and effectively closing.
And you've published a book on this topic. We've talked about this, the nuns, where they
And they're calling non-religious people, they're calling them nuns for some reason.
come from, who they are, and where they're going. But here we are in 2024, so 3 years after that article, and your church has celebrated their last Sunday service. But the rise of nuns, as you've recently published, seems to have plateaued. You wrote recently about this on your Substack. So can you talk to us now about like what you're seeing today in 2024 as a contrast to what we were seeing in 21, 22, even 23? And are the rise of nuns, has it plateaued? Have we kind of reached the boiling point here?
So I think we're next year really in.
And this is the guy who closed his church. He's now a church researcher, and he's an expert on this topic.
Interesting point in the trend line of non-religious people. So the way I think about it is between like 1991 and 2020 was an era. And we're going to look back on this in 50 years. I won't, because I'll be dead, but other people will look back on this in 50 years. And we'll say like that was an era of rapid secularization in America.
All right. So based on his research, from 1991 up until around 2000, he's saying that there was rapid secularization in America. He's going to explain what that means, but it's important to note that time frame.
Where we went from 5% non-religion to was an era. And we're going to look
Your Substack. So can you
the interesting point in the trend line of non-religious people. So the way I think about it is between like 1991 and 2020.
All right, 1991 and 2020, my bad. So that 30-year period
was an era. And we're going to look back on this in 50 years. I won't, because I'll be dead, but other people will look back on this in 50 years. And we'll say like that was an era of rapid secularization in America, where we went from 5% non-religion to 30% non-religion in a span of 3 decades, which is incredibly quick. And in terms of religious demography, doesn't work that way. It's incredibly glacial most times. Like, you know, you might move 2 points in 5 years, but you know, the nuns rose 25 points in 30 years, which is just unbelievable. And then I think what we're seeing now going forward is the nuns have slowed down.
So what he's saying is something took place in the culture between 1991 and 2020 that created a huge spike in non-religious people. Now, I personally believe that it was the information age which produced the internet, which produced social media. I personally believe that once the information age hit, that created more options for people. Again, when he talks about the secularization in the culture, he's talking about the advancement of information, which leads to more education, which leads to more self-reliance. This is a bit of an intellectual discussion. I want you guys to think this through. So I believe that the information age, which produced the internet, has caused people to has accelerated, if I can use that word, has accelerated the removal of God reliance. We no longer need God because the information age has empowered us. The information age has empowered us. So let me let's check this part out.
That's where the nuns are right now, is that we went through a period where a lot of people who were marginally attached to religion sort of fell away from religion and were more likely to identify as non-religious.
So in that period, and this is a conversation that I have with church leaders, okay? in that period from 1991, beginning in that period, he said that people who were marginally associated with religion walked away. In other words, people who were not faithful and people who were not committed and people who were not grounded, they walked away, or as the old folks say, they backslid. So between 1990 and between 2020, a lot of people either backslid or became severely lukewarm and compromised.
In the 80s, in the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. And now, whatever's left over, the people who are still religious are actually much more attached to religion.
The people who made it through that time are on fire and sold out. You can't shake them.
So it's going to be harder for them to become nuns.
So if you were able to stay saved, this is for whoever's going to be watching this video. If you got saved before 1990, I'm in that boat. And you are still living for God with the same passion and the same energy, with the introduction of the internet, with the access to pornography at your fingertips, with the access of hearing 1,000,001 different sermons and church doctrines, and not compromising your doctrine, not compromising your standard of living. If you're that person who remained faithful to God while being bombarded with all this stuff, he's saying that you ain't going nowhere. You ain't going nowhere. That's why what we're seeing in churches is we're seeing a lot of older people left in churches, while a lot of young people, and I know in my church, we got a lot of you guys are in your 30s and in your 20s. And so you guys don't have this experience that he's talking about, because a lot of your parents walked away from God during that time. So let me keep going.
So that's a huge change, because it's not, millions and millions of people leaving church now. It's just generational replacement is what's taking us down, which is a much slower, more methodical process.
Well, and you just said it, right? Like you ascribe the rise of nuns simply to secularization, which is.
Listen to this point, okay? Now keep in mind, the culture has become more secularized, meaning more information, more knowledge, more self-reliant. Watch how this affects the church according to these guys. Listen.
Is something that as pastors and preachers and just folks who work in church, and not even just in church, but who live in Western culture, are experiencing in all sorts of different ways. And secularization simply is just the theory that as nations become more educationally advanced and economically prosperous, they will in turn become less religious. So
the more secular you become, the less religious you become. Now, keep in mind, they're using the word religious loosely in the general sense. In Remnant Park Church, what we believe and what we understand this to mean is that you are no longer aggressively following Jesus Christ. It's not about being religious. It's about your relationship with God. And so the more secular a church becomes, the less dependent they become on God. Listen to this.
Governments, they try and fight against globalization by raising tariffs and stuff. But churches are trying to combat secularization by installing an LED wall or injecting a little more haze onto the stage or something. But it just doesn't seem that like the things we're investing in to stave off secularization in the church are proving to be worth our money, our time, our investment. So if these things aren't working.
Did y'all catch that? Now, for my new people, you're coming into something that we just don't subscribe to. What they're talking about is a current problem in churches. In order for the church to keep up with the culture, the church emulated the culture. It became more secular. LED lights, stage concert lighting. They done flipped the lights off in church. Now it's so dark in your church, you can't even see your hand in front of your face. Pounding sound, smoke machines, pyrotechnics, the whole 9 yards. He's saying that didn't work. People have still left the church. Church numbers are still declining and churches are still closing. He says, could that money have been better spent somewhere else? Great question.
What do you think that churches can do amidst an increasingly secularized culture to not just survive, but thrive?
Now, here's where we are. Because remember, this Bible study, I'm talking about church member or disciple. Keep that in mind. There's context here. Pastors are struggling right now because they've adopted secularism into their churches and it has not worked. Churches are still shrinking. And there's a reason why churches are shrinking. He's about to explain it based on his opinion, which I agree with. Listen to this. He says, what can we do to combat the shrinking of churches?
I think the one thing they need to orient themselves around is the concept of success doesn't mean growth. You know, that's one.
And when he's talking about growth, he's talking about actual numbers. He's talking about success not equaling behinds in the chairs, the number of heads that you can count on Sunday.
I had to reorient the way I thought about things because I'm a numbers guy, right? So I want to see trend lines on my own life going up, whether it be Substack subscriber counts or publications or whatever it is. I want to see those numbers go up.
And we as people were naturally wired to expect success to equal multiplication.
And I think in the religious sphere, what you got to understand is that there's a lot more headwinds in religion than there are tailwinds right now. I think it was almost easy to grow a church in the 1950s. I mean, most parts of America were growing rapidly. Education was increasing rapidly. Economic prosperity was increasing rapidly. And the people seem to be hungry for religion in the post-war period. We're not in that period anymore. You know, I've said this, and I'll say this many times. If Billy Graham was born 40 years later, he would have not been Billy Graham because he walked into the largest, potential flock, possible in the 1950s. If he was born in 1950, he'd be trying to do that in the 1980s, which would not have been nearly as easy. So I think what pastors need to realize is you are operating inside this macro level forces.
He's saying that times have changed. Times have changed, and growing churches by the numbers isn't as easy. In fact, one of the things, if you study church culture, for those who might be watching this later, you'll realize that a lot of our larger churches are churches that are 2 generations deep. They were started by an old man, and those numbers exploded. But what churches have not been able to do is maintain those numbers. So they've adopted secularism in an attempt to maintain numbers in order to emulate the world. And that isn't working. What it's doing is it's making members, but it's not making disciples.
Right? That are changing American society every day. And to use the tactics that were used 30 years ago is just completely illogical based on what's happening to us around us right now. I think our job, and this is what I keep telling people, what I realized in my last couple of years, and listen, to be completely frank with you, I beat myself up for maybe 10 years as pastor of First Baptist Church because I was not doing my job in terms of growing the church, turning the church around, revival, and any of those things. I got to the point where I realized that what God called me to was to be a hospice pastor. Every pastor's calling is not to, start a church that grows to 5,000 people. That's not success. God calls me to be faithful.
I'm going to hang out right there and just let that sink in for a minute. He's saying that he wasn't called to create numbers, to build numbers. He said not everybody's called to do that. He said he was called to be faithful. See, this is why churches have a whole lot of members, and this is why they don't have any disciples. It's because members have options, disciples don't. Members are just there for the snacks. Disciples are actually hungry. Members come and go, but just like he said, disciples are called to be faithful. So the problem with people today is that they don't even see the need to become a disciple when membership is an option that they have. When membership is an option in the chat, not just there for the snacks. I'm glad you're not there for the snacks. But it's crazy. But here you have people who now would rather join your online church and be a member of your online campus. You can literally have Google as your God today. People no longer see the path to discipleship as the only way to follow Jesus. They see membership in a church, a certain type of church, the church that they like, the church that makes them feel good and cozy and warm. That's the church that they want. They don't want discipleship they don't see discipleship as the only way to come to Jesus, especially when the modern church no longer requires discipleship. It only pushes membership. I love my church, but do you love Jesus? That's the question. So, what is the path? Our text says it all in Luke chapter 14, verses 25, 26, and 27. When a large crowd, arguably a church, it says a large crowd was following Jesus. Very easy to say Jesus had a whole lot of people following him, thousands. Could have easily considered himself a mega church pastor. He turned around and he said to them, if you want to be my disciple, you must by comparison hate everyone else. Your father and your mother, your wife and your children, your brothers and your sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you can't be a member of my church. You can't be my disciple, he says. And if you don't carry your own cross, meaning if you don't learn how to struggle and suffer and go through difficult times because life ain't easy, everybody don't get a trophy. Everybody don't win. Sometimes we lose. If you don't learn how to carry your cross and follow me, go through life and follow me, go through struggles and follow me, go through sickness and follow me, go through poverty and follow me. If you can't carry your cross and follow me, you can't be my disciple. Period. This is why when you leave everything to pursue Jesus, you prioritize Jesus over everyone and everything. That's how we measure your passion, by how much you pursue him. If he tells you my love language is complete solidarity to me, that's what he expects. You can't just be like, oh, I'm a Christian, but I'm still going to do this. You're not fit. You can't be his disciple. It's either Jesus or nothing. You have to remove your options. Yep. You got to remove your options. Remember I told you guys I was going to read John chapter 6? Turn to the book of John chapter 6. I want you guys to listen to the difference between a church member and a disciple. Listen to the difference here. Remember, church members, they just want the snacks. Listen to the difference between a church member who has options and a disciple who has no options. John chapter number 6. I'm going to read this very fast, so I need you to keep up. After this, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. A huge crowd kept following him wherever he went because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. Snacks. They saw the tricks that he could perform. He drew huge crowds because of what he was able to do for them. That's why they followed him. Then Jesus climbed a hill and sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. So class was in session. He was teaching his disciples. Philip replied, "Even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them." Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd?" Jesus says, "Tell everyone to sit down." So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. It says the men alone numbered about 5,000. So if there were men, women, and children, it's safe to say there's about 20,000 or more people there. It says, then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. So he took 2 loaves and 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he fed over 20,000 people, roughly. That's a miracle, okay? That's why they were following him, because he was able to do for them. He was able to give to them. It says, and they ate as much as they wanted. Man, what a nice church. What an awesome pastor. You mean to tell me that Pastor Jesus would feed us? Wow. Verse number 12, after everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, "Now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted." So they picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. It says, when the people saw him do this miraculous sign, they exclaimed, "Surely he is the prophet we've been expecting." When Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills by himself. He didn't want a mega church, ladies and gentlemen. He's not ambitious like some of these preachers out here who are just dying and will do anything and give the people whatever they want if they crown him king. Jesus was not that type of a pastor. He was not trying to grow numbers. He wasn't trying to make members. He was trying to make disciples. We read it in Luke. Let's keep reading. You know what? I'm going to skip. Let's go down to verse 22. It says, the next day, the crowd that had stayed on the far shore saw that the disciples had taken the only boat, and they realized that Jesus had not gone with them. Several boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the Lord had blessed the bread and the people had eaten. Several boats had landed where Jesus did that miracle, meaning Jesus was drawing an even bigger crowd. Boats started showing up. So if you thought word traveled fast online, Jesus was going viral 2,000 years ago. It says, so when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor the disciples were there, they got into the boats and they went across to Capernaum to look for him. Where you at, Pastor? Man, that food was good. You've been healing people. You've been feeding people. We ain't ever leaving this church. In fact, I'm going to bring my relatives, my neighbors. I'm going to tell them how prosperous we are at this church because our pastor can do miracles. They were looking all over for him. Where are you at? Says, so the crowd, blah, 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 blah. Verse 25, it says, they found him on the other side of the lake, and they asked, Rabbi, when did you get here? Jesus replied, here it comes. I tell you the truth. Here comes some real preaching. Here comes a real pastor. He says, I tell you the truth. You want to be with me because I fed you, not because you understood the miraculous signs. You don't know why I did it. You don't even care. You just like the fact that you got some snacks. You like the fact that we got a popping choir and that we got lights and we got the cameras and that we on TV and that we go viral. You like that. Okay. But verse 27, he says, but don't be concerned about perishable things like food. He says, spend your energy, your passion, your hunger. He says, spend your energy seeking the eternal life that the Son of Man can give you. For God the Father has given me this seal of approval. Oh, they didn't like that. It says, they replied, we want to perform God's works too. What should we do? We want to be able to do them tricks. How are we going to do it? Give us the cheat codes. Jesus told them, this is the only work God wants from you. Believe in the one he has sent. Believe me, in other words. They answered, uh-oh. Now the church is about to give him some pushback because he's not that puppet pastor that they thought he was. See, they thought that if they just keep coming, he would give them miracles. And he would give them miracles in order to keep them coming. See, they thought he needed them. They thought that he wanted a mega church and that he was doing tricks to keep the crowd. But he's about to flip on them because Jesus ain't like today's pastor. He's not like your pastor, internet. He's not like your pastor who's trying to do a new trick every week to keep you interested to keep coming. No, he's not. He's not like your pastor who's working on his swag and working on his speech every Sunday to impress you. Listen to what Jesus said to them. They answered, show us a miraculous sign if you want us to believe in you. What can you do? Wow. The audacity, church, for y'all to come at your pastor like that. What can you do for us, pastor? After all, our ancestors ate manna while they were journeying through the wilderness. The scriptures say Moses gave them bread from heaven to eat. Wow, church. You gonna compare your pastor to the pastor down the street? Wow. But that's what we have with members. You see, the difference between a member and a disciple is a member has options. A member can look at your church and say, yeah, you know what, this church ain't meeting my needs anymore. Oh, really? That's the church you got saved in. That's the pastor that's been spending time with you and visiting you and praying for you and standing in the gap for you. But now you're going to compare your pastor to the pastor down the street? That's what they did. They said, what can you do? Because Moses gave us bread from heaven. Jesus literally just fed them with bread and fish. But they ain't happy. They ain't satisfied because members are constantly needing to be pleased. Watch this. It says, Jesus said, I tell you the truth. Moses didn't give you bread from heaven. My Father did. Oh, bars. He says, and now he offers you the true bread from heaven. He's talking about himself. The true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives you life to the world. Sir, they said again, give us this bread every day. Make me feel good every day. I want to see you, pastor, in my feed, in my scroll. I want to come to church and I want to eat good every day. Wow. Jesus replied, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But you haven't believed in me, even though you have seen me. Wow. However, those the Father has given me will come to me, and I will never reject them. For I have come down from heaven to do the will of God who sent me, not to do my own will, like some pastors. And this is the will of God, that I should not lose even one of all those he has given me, but that I should raise them up in the last day. For it is my Father's will that all who sees his Son and believe in him should have eternal life. I will raise them up in the last day. Now, they didn't like that. Verse 41, then the people began to murmur in disagreement because he said, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. They said, isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph? So now they've resorted to character attacks. We know his father and mother. How can he say I came down from heaven? Wow. So now you're going to attack your pastor's character. Yeah, he grew up in a poor neighborhood. How could God possibly use him? He don't have money. He don't have nice things. He don't have swag. He's not handsome. He's not good looking. He ain't got 20,000 followers. He don't have a cool sermon. He ain't got no big church. Wow, they came at his character. Because members, they can't be satisfied. It says, but Jesus said, stop complaining about what I said. For no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them to me. And at that last day, I will raise them up. As it is written in the scriptures, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who listens to the Father and learns from him comes to me. Not that everyone has ever seen the Father, only I, who was sent from God, have seen him. I tell you the truth, anyone who believes has eternal life. Yes, I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, but they all died. Anyone who eats the bread from heaven, however, will never die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will live forever. And this bread, which I offer so to the world, or which I will offer so to the world, so that the world may live, is my flesh. Then the people began arguing with each other about what he meant. How can this man give us his flesh to eat, they asked. So Jesus said it again. I tell you the truth, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you cannot have eternal life within you. He wasn't actually talking about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. He was talking about commitment and faithfulness. That's what we watched in this video. See, this pastor has learned. It's not about growing numbers. It's about faithfulness. It's about being faithful. And so Jesus reiterated this fact, meaning if you don't eat my flesh, or in other words, if you don't consume my doctrine, I'm bread, the bread of life. The Bible describes the word as bread. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God shall man live by. And then he talked about drinking his blood. His blood equals the suffering. Remember, he told us in Luke, unless you carry your cross, you got to go through some things. You got to suffer. You got to stick to the doctrine, and you got to learn how to suffer with me. Otherwise, you can't be my disciple. He said, anyone who eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. I live because of the living Father who sent me. In the same way, anyone who feeds on me will live because of me. I am the true bread that comes down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will not die, as your ancestors did. As your ancestors died. He says, even though they ate the manna, but will live forever, he says. He said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. Now, listen to this. This is the results. This is what separates members from disciples. It says many of his disciples, or the people that were following him, they said this. This is very hard to understand. How can anyone accept it? How can anyone follow this type of preaching? What he just told me to do is hard. Poor me. He just preached a hard message, and now I'm church hurt. Jesus was aware that his disciples are complaining. So he said to them, he spoke to the whole church, the crowd of over 20,000 people. He said, does this offend you? You mad? You big mad? That's what he said. You mad? He says, then what will you think if you see the Son of Man ascend to heaven again? The Spirit alone gives eternal life. Human effort accomplishes nothing. And the very words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But some of you do not believe me. For Jesus knew from the beginning which ones didn't believe, and he knew who would betray him. Verse 65, then he said, that is why I said the people can't come to me unless the Father gives them to me. And here's the clincher. This is the difference between members and disciples. Verse 66, at this point, many of his disciples turned away and deserted him. They left the church. They were hurt because Jesus challenged them to do better. Jesus challenged them. He stretched them, told them that it ain't always about free stuff and snacks. You got to want this. You got to want this so bad that you can even suffer. You can even endure trouble. You can even endure a hard sermon and not get offended. At this point, many of his disciples turned away and deserted him. Then Jesus turned to the 12 and he asked, are you going to leave? He turned to the church leaders. He said, are you leaving too? You gonna leave? You mad? Watch this. Simon Peter replied, Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words that give eternal life. We believe and we know you are the Holy One of God. Wow. See, that's the difference between a disciple and a member. When you have options, you exercise your options. When you don't fully surrender to Christ, you go back to the thing that you put on hold for God. Just in case the whole church thing don't work out, you're going to go back to that thing that you didn't surrender. See, disciples are built different. Members, they're wishy-washy. They'll go to the next hot thing. They're going to chase behind preacher after preacher after preacher because they're not faithful. But disciples are built different. So in a pandemic, when churches are closing, members will walk away from God, but disciples will remain faithful to God. They'll pray in their home. They'll have church with their family. They'll read their Bibles. But a member will struggle and even walk away from God entirely because they can't hear a word from the pastor. Because they can't get to the church and pray and cry and hear the singing and the choir. When sickness takes over your body and the preacher that lied to you and told you that that seed that you send in was going to get your healing, when that don't work, a member will walk away from God. They'll be mad. They'll be angry. But a disciple will still serve God no matter what. When times get hard, members leave, members quit, members give up, but disciples are faithful. So when times change, when churches start closing, when numbers start declining, there's going to be members that go downhill with them. But then there's going to be faithful people who are made up in their minds that where else can I go? I've literally walked away from everything to follow Jesus. That's the difference between a member and a disciple. I'm all done. Does anyone have any questions or any comments that they would like to leave? Anybody care to leave any questions or any comments? We talked about the difference between being just a member of somebody's church and an actual disciple of Jesus Christ. There's a difference. I don't want you to just be a member at Remnant Park Church. No. It is my job to disciple you. That's it. Because that's what Jesus told me to do. He said to make disciples. He didn't say make church members. And so I regularly preach messages and teach things, teach principles that may stretch you a little bit. It may challenge you a little bit. But I promise you, if you're just here for the snacks, well, we'll give you coffee and donuts from time to time. But as already mentioned in the chat, Sheeta says, I'm not here for the snacks. That's good, because we don't have snacks all the time. You'd have left us a long time ago. So, God bless y'all. No other, thank you for the comments in the chat. If no one has anything to say or anything to add, I'm going to let you guys go. And we will see you, this weekend. This weekend is the peer-to-peer mentoring where the young women are coming together and they're going to share and they're going to talk about life and how to live a successful, godly life in today's climate. We're seeing that what's happening is people are walking away from the church because they haven't mastered the daily. We know how to do church on Sunday. Members know how to do that. But disciples have learned how to do it Monday through Saturday. Everything that we talked about today, the ladies are going to have very specific sharing along those lines. Listen, you need to be there. You need to be there. So we got a question here in the chat. Hang on a second. We got a question here in the chat. Do you think if the crowd understood what he meant by eating his flesh and eating his blood, and eating his flesh and blood, would it have been different? It would have totally been different. It would have totally been different if they understood it. But the problem is they actually didn't understand it because it was blinded to them. And so what we learn is that the things of God, the Bible actually teaches us, that the things of God are blinded to people who aren't hungry. Because they had options. They really weren't interested in what Jesus was doing. That's why he checked them. He says, you guys are more interested in the miracles and not why I did them. Y'all are asking the wrong questions, in other words. Y'all ain't even getting to the root of this. Y'all just happy to be in the party, in the mega church, in the popping church. See, had they been hungry and had they been genuinely interested in Jesus's message and his doctrine, they would have understood. Just like his disciples, the 12, understood. That's how many people, when we talk about people who are just members in churches, you look at the 20,000 plus people that walked away from Jesus that day and compare that in ratio to 12. 20,000 members versus 12 disciples. That's about the way it looks in churches these days. Yeah. Most people that go to church, they're not there because they want to be a disciple. They're there because of the snacks. They're there for the fishes and the loaves, for the miracles and the healings that they think they're going to get. And so they're going to keep coming for the show. for the entertainment, because they get the goosebumps and they like how they feel because the singing and the runs and the keyboard and the lights. Yeah. So by and large, this is a lesson in proportion to how many people are just here for the show versus how many people really love Jesus and are going to go through thick and thin with him no matter what. The difference between members and disciples. That's a good question. Great question. Anyone else have any comments or any questions? All right. We're going to pray for Roderick. I'm going to go ahead and end this call, and then we're going to have prayer for him right now. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay. All right. So we're going to end the feed, and let's just remember this weekend is the peer-to-peer mentoring. Our young ladies, the Remnant Park ladies, are going to get together, and then church on Sunday. And to our internet viewers, if you're in the Houston area and you're looking for a church that focuses on discipleship and growing, you need to come check us out. We keep it real, we keep it 100, and we are a growing family that is always keeping the door open. So God bless y'all. And